Góðan daginn. Welcome to the Herravintage YouTube channel, home of all things vintage. If you've ever lived in Reykjavik, the capital city of Iceland, for any period of time, likely you found it extremely expensive to find accommodation here. Even for a tiny room, you could be paying somewhere between $600 to $800 US. And for a studio apartment, $1,300 or more. Of course, this does depend on the location and your luck. The closer you live to the city center, the higher the prices are going to be. Chances are you're going to be spending a large chunk of your monthly income on housing alone. For many, especially those of lower socioeconomic status, finding adequate accommodation is very tricky. However, there are many factors that contribute to this. The heavy investment in the tourist accommodation industry, whether it be hotels or Airbnb, along with focusing almost exclusively on middle to high income housing, is leaving a huge gap for those who might not have the means. Along with the steady growing population, the demand for affordable housing in this day and age is imperative. However, this isn't a new problem. In fact, the city of Reykjavik, along with other growing urban centers in the country during the early 20th century, were experiencing something similar. Their ultimate solution to the problem was government-subsidized housing for the working class. This video will take you through the early history of this new type of housing solution in an emerging, sovereign nation keen on going its own way. Located on the Seltjarnar Peninsula, Reykjavik began as a humble cluster of farms, said to have been established by Ingólfur Arnarsson in the 9th century. By the 19th century, it would grow to be a small but rather central village. With its designation of being the administrative seat of the island, thanks to Danish rule on August 18, 1786, and its rather favorable harbor, natural growth was a given. And as an Icelandic national independence movement was brewing, the Althing Parliament was re-established with its seat being Reykjavik. This practically cemented the town's future as the capital of a blooming sovereign nation. By the 20th century, as industry began to steadily grow in the capital, an influx of people from all over the country came for new opportunities. These early workers would have made temporary dwellings or lived in shed-like structures, most likely without electricity or plumbing. This was becoming an obvious problem for the city as most of the housing was either occupied or didn't have enough space for the projected population growth. This is where we enter the solutions to this problem. There were a few people in the business of building new timber houses for prospecting buyers at this time, one of them being the industrious gentleman of the name of Bjarni Jónsson. Bjarni had found an opportunity of using his carpentry skills to work by building and renting out some of the properties he had established. One of them was a large timber house which held around 15 apartments, located on Hverfisgata Street, built in the year 1902. This was the first apartment structure of its kind in the entire country. By 1916, the city of Reykjavik would then purchase the property and subsequently use it as a place for low-income renters, subsidizing all rent prices. According to a 1987 article about Bjarnaborg by the newspaper Helgarpósturinn, by 1917, around 168 people were living in the building. This is very notable as we can establish this to be the first instance of social housing in Iceland. It was evident that more initiatives needed to occur to quell the housing issue. Moreover, as the early 20th century rolled on, new technologies and techniques became commonplace. As an example of this is the usage of concrete, indoor plumbing, and electricity. The Icelandic government, along with the city of Reykjavik, had an inevitable undertaking. Large portions of the citizens did not have access to these modern amenities. And as the city expanded, this gave the early city planners the challenge of implementing the latest construction techniques the era had to offer. Since the subsidization of the aforementioned Bjarnaborg apartments, the next notable attempt of providing workers accommodation came in 1921. In that year, the city passed a new planning law which incentivized organized row buildings, not unlike those in Copenhagen at the time. On behalf of Landsbanken, the national bank, was a plan to construct the newest examples of what modern techniques and amenities had to offer in accordance to the new planning focus. Designed by the newly appointed state architect, Guðjón Samúelsson, these terraced row apartments were influenced by English examples, which included access to a small garden plot in the front. The design itself was in the experimental Icelandic national romantic style, taking hints from the turf houses of old. But unlike its ancient predecessors, this was primarily built with concrete. Moreover, these apartments were equipped with the latest appliances and included electricity, water, bathrooms, and kitchens. This was a dawn of a new age. Although the original idea was to market these to lower income individuals, the construction prices led to the rent of these properties to be way too high for the average person. It would ultimately be rented out to those of middle-class background or specialized craftsmen who had the means to afford them. A huge leap in the development of the city came in 1929 with the establishment of the Byggingarfélag Verkamanna, or Workers' Construction Association, spearheaded by the Alþýðuflokkur politician Héðinn Valdimarsson, who became the chairman of the association. A set of new ambitious plans to provide hundreds of houses to low-income families and workers was initiated. Starting by 1931, along plots near the outer ring road encircling the city, the construction began. The first 2 phases of the project from 1931 through 35 were designed with multiple rectilinear blocks along the street, with a large open plot in the center equipped with playgrounds for children and recreation for the tenants. Each block contains 4 apartments, along with the shared basements which held laundry and drying facilities. Moreover, each house was equipped with modern electric cooking stoves, as well as bathrooms and bathtubs. Made of sturdy concrete in a no-nonsense modern design, this was the dawn of the functionalist era of Icelandic architecture, a style which focuses primarily on the function over non-essential decoration. One can easily spot them all over the country, as straight lines and delicate curves dictate their overall appearance. A key figure in the development of the state-of-the-art housing was none other than the state architect Guðjón Samúelsson. During the second and third phases, 2 other prominent architects contributed likewise, that being the first notable modernist Icelandic architect, Gunnlaugur Halldórsson, and Einar Erlendsson, who was also well respected in the field. By the time of the third phase, which was completed in 1937, additional accommodations were built. However, in a different orientation as to provide sunlight in most rooms, even during the winter when the sun is low. It should be mentioned that these blocks are adjacent to the first iterations. These worker accommodations proved to be a huge success in providing people of lower income brackets clean and modern amenities, which was one of the primary goals of the state at the time. A huge influx of similar functionalist style blocks in various scales were thus being built all throughout the city in the 1930s up to the late 1950s. Although the subsidized funds for the Workers' Building Association dried up around 1939, the group continued to contribute to the needs of the communities around the country. Some examples of social housing for workers outside of Reykjavik directed under the association include the apartments along Selvogsgata and Hafnarfjörður, and the apartments on Grundargata and Ísafjörður. During the conflicts of the Second World War during the 1940s, and with the capitulation of Denmark to Nazi Germany, Iceland would subsequently be occupied by the Allied forces only moments later. First under control of the British forces, the oversight of the island nation would be handed over to the United States, even after the end of the world conflict. Iceland would receive benefits from the cooperation with the Allies, including things like infrastructure assistance, as well as national defense. In 1945, Iceland would also become entirely free from the Danish kingdom. Like in other areas in the West, the post-war period would see an increase of wealth, and in the case for the newly free country of Iceland, a building boom would ensure. From the 1940s and into the 1950s, many of the same building methods were used for apartments, the functionalist style using Icelandic concrete. Although technically built during the interwar period, a good example of this would be the apartment complex designed by Einar Sveinsson in 1942, employing over a decade of knowledge in the building of high-quality functionalist buildings. The overall appearance of these simplistic buildings would adjust with the times, and by the time of the late 1950s and beyond, it would become somewhat outdated. More contemporary styles were being favored. In 1956, one of the first multi-story apartment towers was built by Gísli Halldórsson. A few years later, an even taller tower was built by Kjartan Sveinsson, making it one of the tallest, if not the tallest structure in the entire country at its time. In the newly developing area of Breiðholt in the 1960s, social housing flourished in the mid-rise apartment blocks, which were contemporary at the time, not unlike those being built in other countries. Large amounts of these were constructed, and neighborhoods grew from them. Although to many people, these blocks look somewhat drab. It is important to realize that these socially subsidized apartments did what it was built for: provide high-quality housing to thousands of lower-income people. This type of style would continue in some form or another into the 1970s and 1980s. Even today, the apartments in the Breiðholt area are rented out at lower prices in comparison to other areas in the capital region. It would seem as the decades went on, the amount of affordable housing would become less frequent as more and more people per capita made more money, providing more housing opportunities. There are some notable buildings in the spirit of the first social housing projects in the country. However, a focus on middle-class to luxury properties seems to be getting more attention. And I would say that continues into today, possibly at an alarming rate. There are many factors for this, and to be honest, this topic isn't in my expertise. That basically is it. That's really the early history of social housing in Iceland. There's a lot more information out there, and I would love to go through them. For instance, in a lot of books like this one here, it does talk about social housing during this period, the interwar period. Really interesting read. I have a soft spot for a lot of the functionalist style buildings in the country. I do think they have a really interesting style, not just in apartments, but in regular single-family housing. There's it's such an interesting style, kind of similar to streamlined modern, almost. If anyone stumbled across this video and enjoyed it, please give it a like, perhaps subscribe, because I'll be making more videos like this in the future. I will be focusing a lot on vintage things, as well as vintage clothing, so if that's something you like, stay tuned, because I'll be doing some vintage clothing content very soon. That being said, I wish you guys a wonderful time, wonderful day, and yeah, I'll catch you on the flip side. Farewell. Just for the fun of it, I think I'll do a outfit rundown. I'm going very casual today with this tweed sports coat in a beige color with a blue overcheck. I'm combining it with this blue handkerchief, which ties in with the navy trousers from a 1940s suit that I have. Although bold, I'm wearing a very bright green jumper from the 1940s, paired with this plaid tie and wool to give it some extra texture, and a pink dress shirt. Last but not least, I can't forget this 1930s Bulova wristwatch. It's very cool. It's in gold, very small, not too over the top. I think it works well with a lot of outfits that I have. That is it.